I will speak
Hold
to.
hold on 1 second before you start. All right, everybody, we are live. Dynasty Mirror Search for a Guru. And I know we continue to speak on this topic. I know many of you are probably tired of hearing about me speaking over and over and over again about Liberia. But it's something that it's a topic that needs to be addressed. It's something that needs to be unpackaged. You know, I've had Brother Morgan on, who is Marico Indigenous Mixed. Professor Davis has been on. Caligenesis has been on, who's been an expert in regards to Liberia and America and Black America's involvement in Liberia. But today I have Brother Deloiyd, who's actually an indigenous Liberian, correct?
Deloiyd, yes.
All right. And, you know, we're just going to chop it up. And, you know, a lot of people are like, Dynus, won't you bring on somebody who's indigenous to give their point of view so we can hear both sides of the story, get both point of view. So, Brother Deloiyd, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Now, so were you born and raised in Liberia, or?
Born and raised in Liberia. Was born in Greenville, 1981, and was born in Greenville. Lived in Greenville until we had the wars in the 90s, and then 1995 migrated to Monrovia to seek, you know, greener pasture in terms of getting schooling opportunities, because other schools were closed down in the rural areas where we were at the time, and continued schooling in Monrovia. Graduated from the Assembly of God High School in Monrovia City on the Buchanan Street, and went to the African Methodist Episcopal University, where I did a study in economics and got a bachelor's degree.
And this is all in Liberia, the African American
African Methodist.
The AME Church. The AME Church.
The AME Church University, yes.
Okay, so the AME Church, because Brother Davis talks about this a lot. So the AME Church has an actual university in Liberia.
That's a school I went to.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's a school I went to. The AME Church has a whole block on the Camp Johnson Road. There's a whole area there that they have to themselves as a church establishment. And remember now, the AME Church is one of those old churches that went along with African Americans when they were repatriated to Africa, specifically to Liberia. And the AME Church was one of those faiths that they took along with them, including the Baptist Church. But originally, the first church that was taken there and that was built was the Providence Baptist. The guys built the Providence Baptist Church. And the Providence Baptist Church was more of the founding Christian church in Liberia. In that church, there were a lot of things that were done on behalf of the country in terms of beginning administrative works. With regards to the fate of Liberia, and originally Liberia was exclusively a Christian state. As time went by, in the early 80s, the late 70s, when we had a change of constitution, that's when the constitution was redrafted and included a secular state, because with now this government now and people in high places, including Muslims and the very minute portion of the population, were kind of like gaining more prominence, and they needed to be recognized at the time.
1 second, not to cut you off. You said Muslims. Now, did did these Muslims come from America, or were they already in Africa?
Muslims were already in Africa.
Okay, got you. So they didn't come via when the Black Americans came. The Americans came.
When Black Americans went to Africa, they went. All of Black Americans that went to Africa by history were all Christians. They were either Christians or non-Christian, but or non-religious. But they were all Christians, and they weren't originally with the Baptist Church.
Okay.
And then the Baptist Church. Then you got the Methodist Church. You got the AME Church. And you have a host of other churches like the Lutheran Church and all of those churches that followed on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pete, all right. So let me ask you this first question. So someone said in the chat the other day when Professor Davis was on. Peace to everybody in the chat room. Thank you for joining us. That indigenous Liberians weren't allowed or didn't have access or weren't allowed to get an education under American rule. Can you speak on that?
Yes. Originally, when we had free slaves or the American Liberian arrived on the soil of Africa and then settled down on the Liberian soil, they got themselves established. And there was struggle in the process because there was this issue of class systems and there was this issue of migration and intermingling. It's just same as you may refer to what's going on currently in the U.S. and other parts of the world. There were issues of class and there were issues of struggles, people settling down were not accepted quite easily. And so it became a little struggle between the American Liberians and that of the native Liberians. However, the American Liberians had the expertise. They were educated, they had exposure, and so they went along with those exposure and it started with all of these things that they had to themselves. They opened schools, they had farms, they had different things going on. But the typical Liberian man was not involved with education, so to speak, at the beginning because they were considered to be countrymen or country people who knew nothing. And so the American Liberians, what they did was they would go in the upcountry area and, in the interior part of the country, wherever they go, and they adopt a Liberian, an indigenous kid. When that kid is adopted, your name becomes Johnson. It depends on the family that adopted you. And so they change your name to their name so that you become part of their families. However, being part of that American Liberian family, you're going to be the one to be dumping the pee in the morning when people slept in their houses and they have to pee in the chambers or something we call chamber, like a little bowl, a little bucket or something, a little gallon of stuff that everybody goes through in the night and pee into it. In the morning, somebody has to dump that pee. Who's going to take that pee in the toilet, in the outside toilet? And you're the one who living with them, who's not perhaps, a biological child. So you're basically a servant child. And so you're going to be the one to serve all the guys in the house. And before everybody gets out of that house, you got to make sure to get the hot water done. You got to make fire in the morning and make the hot waters. You got to be able to put the waters in the bathroom. For some of them, you got to wash their clothes on the weekends.
So they were doing domestic work around the house. The like indigenous Liberians that were adopted by the Americans.
indigenous Liberians were doing domestic work. They were adapted doing the domestic work, and eventually some of them lived with very good families. Those families who were very good, despite of the domestic work that they did, they also sent them to school. They educated them. They had difficulties in comprehending their lesson and with that of the housework or choices they had to do at home. Many of them were pretty smart guys who lived with these people, and so they come out of it. They came out of it with flying colors. They learned in school when they went to school. The time they had to study, they studied the lesson and still made good marks. That's how most Liberians, indigenous Liberians, got educated, so to speak. The guys who were referred to as the progressives. The guys who were referred to as the progressives, there were many of them who lived with either an American Liberian, or they are lived with someone who lived with an American Liberian, and therefore they got the civilization by going to school, by learning how to read and write, by being articulative and knowing the function of government.
Are you there?
And yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I thought you had a question.
No, so okay, so usually what we hear is that the the Americos enslaved the indigenous population. Can you speak on that? Or was it more just domestic work that the indigenous population?
It was that enslavement. The word enslave could be used if you try to modify the ideology, the act of adapting young indigenous into an American Liberian's home for them to be servants. I don't know if we can use the word slave, but yes, indeed, Liberians, indigenous Liberian had to live with American Liberians in order for them to get education. That's one fact. They had to adapt the names of an American Liberian in order to be accepted at the Liberian college at the time. Because you could not go to the Liberian college with the name, let's take for example, Uhuru. Uhuru is not an English name.
No.
So obviously, if you went to the university, they're going to ask you, the first question they're going to ask you would be, what is your name? My name is Uhuru. Uhuru, where are you from? Uhuru? Oh, I'm from somewhere downtown. I'm from downtown Greenville. I'm from downtown Monrovia. Which part of downtown Monrovia are you from? Who are you? Who rear you? Who are your parents? What are you doing with that name? So having interrogated you with all of those questions, they're probably not going to consider you to enroll because they feel that you are not of a class to be part of the class.
Okay, so it's safe to say that Americos discriminated against indigenous Liberians when it came to attaining an education.
Yes, in the beginning.
In the beginning. Okay. Do you know why specifically? Why did the Americos want the indigenous population to adopt or I guess integrate and change their last names? I mean, like why what was the thinking behind that?
When you look at it logically, you'll be talking about they had this strategy that will build their own families and would not set up segregation in case of success. Secondly,
okay,
they believe that they have come from the Americas where they were enslaved, and given the circumstances that they went through, they were probably not secure with just opening up with anybody. So, given the insecurity, they decided to. That's why they had the attitude of adopting, changing of names, and including before you can get included into the class of the families, and before you can even go to school. So as that went on, those things changed anyway. In the 70s, in the late 70s to the 80s, those things began to change. When we had President Taubert, many of those things changed because Taubert was more culturally diverse. He incorporated a lot of people. In fact, it was during the Taubert regime that we had the progressive movement. When you talk about guys like Bacchus Matthew, H. Boyman Fambule, George Boley, and all of these guys who came out of the university, they became more vocal because Taubert, to some extent, tolerated these things. But he did not know that it would have turned out to be his death. Yes. So, you got a question?
Let me ask you this. So during Taubert, so again, we're taught, and then correct me if I'm wrong, please be honest, that the indigenous population was heavily marginalized to the point to, again, they were treated like slaves. During Taubert, when Taubert was in office, obviously, you had Kwame Nkrumah, who was in power in Ghana. You had Toure. What's Toure's? So is it Samari Toure?
Toure. Sekou Toure.
Sekou Toure, who I believe was in power as well. Let's deal with Kwame Nkrumah. Now, if the indigenous population was marginalized to the effect that many, whether it be historians, even indigenous Liberians say they were, why didn't the likes of Kwame and Nkrumah speak out and demand that, we'll say, Taubert stop marginalizing the indigenous population? Because Kwame Nkrumah was a Pan-African.
When you had Kwame Nkrumah, what was happening at the time? I don't know to what extent that the rest of the world knew what was going on. It's like you had the Liberian institutions that were already being built by these American Liberians. Imagine the time from 1847 to the time of Taubert. That was, you talking about, about 100 years and more, or a little close to 100 years. That is from 1847 to that of 1964, and coming down to it's just quite a lot of years for a lot of development to have occurred. So there were changes along the lines. Those things were being practiced still in different communities, but they were not on the high level because there were already more indigenous or native Liberians who had gotten educated, and they have in fact gone about changing their names back to their native names. And so there was some change of transformation going on in the 70s and coming up to the 80s. By the time we got in the late 70s and the early 80s, there were a lot of change. The indigenous guys were already into government. A lot of them were into government already. They were already in high places around the world, in local places within the country. But you still have these things going on. People saw that as the indigenous Liberian family, in fact, those villagers, they saw the opportunity as a means of educating their own children by giving the child to an American Liberian family so they can learn and go to school. Because that's the only way they thought they would have been liberated if the child were educated. And the only way the child got educated except this child is living with someone who lives in the city. Not only that that person lives in the city, but that person would be able to educate their child. So that was the trend. And that trend lived on. Even when I was a kid, I knew of families. We have friends in the neighborhoods who were living with these people, who were still living with people who were being adopted. I mean, I'm telling you about, I was born in the early 80s, 1981, and I'm telling you about something between the mid 80s and coming upwards to the late 80s. We knew about families, guys who lived with families. These guys came from different places upriver, and they were living with these families because they were adopted, and they were still serving these people.
Okay. Someone had a question over on the Facebook side. They wanted to know, can you tell us more about the educated Vai Gribos and Golas?
The Vais are one of those groups of people who were first met by the American Liberians when they got there in Liberia. The Vais live on the west coast of Liberia, the Cape Mount region, and then you have the Bombing Hills. Bombing County is where you have the deposit of the Gola people, the Dane Gola. All of those people from Cape Mount coming down to Monrovia, where you have the Montserrat County, where you have Monrovia. All of those areas were occupied by the Vai and the Gola. When the Americans Liberians fled the Chevron Island from the Sierra Leone side due to mosquito bites in the early 1822s, they came down to the Providence Island, a little island now known as the Providence Island, where they got the sought refuge and became to establish themselves. All of those areas were being surrounded by the Vai, the Golas, and a few of them, like King Sauboso, who was a Mandingo man. They were all in that area. And so those were some of those people who they were first encountered. They first encountered when they got on the land. The level of education was, they were given access because they had opportunities to interact with these people. And so they got chances of going to school very early, and they learned from them too. On the East Coast, where you have the Gribbles and the Crews, where I come from, I'm a Crew guy from the East Coast.
Yeah, somebody was asking if you were what nationality or what ethnicity.
I'm a Crew guy from the East Coast. I am from Sino County. Mm-hmm. And on the East Coast, where you have the Crews, the Gribbles, and the northeastern coast is where you have the Crine and the Sapo. But the Crew and the Gribble are much more closer to the ocean. And so we have firsthand interaction with those American Liberians that came in. So the area called, when they first came in, the then Mississippi area were they named by themselves, and then the Maryland in Africa that was also named. And so the Maryland in Africa is a place dominated by Gribble people. So these people have firsthand interaction with the American Liberian, and through the same struggle of adoption and interaction of over the period of close interaction, intermingling, and intermarriages led to these people's education. They all got educated through these interactions over the period of time. So yes, indeed, the Vai, the Gola, the Gribbles, the Crews, the Bassa, they first got educated, before the spread of it throughout the rest of the country.
Hey, what's going on behind you?
That's my boy. What you saying, man?
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know, man. He's just He's been like impressive.
Go ahead. It's all good. Go ahead and finish.
So, so Liberia, when it comes to that part of it, that's how that's how Liberians, especially from the indigenous line, gained their education. But it was not easy at the start, and it still wasn't easy in the transition. In fact, when the native guys got educated, they felt that they understand democracy, they understand the government's workings, and they thought that there should be a shared government. There should be elections, there should be different political parties. And so they staged their own intellectual discourses. They requested a lot of things that could not work for them. And that's what led to the Ballad of the Guns. And when you talk about Samuel Doe and that of the American Liberians rule.
Well, let me ask you this before we get to Doe. Couple more questions before we get there. Question number one. When the Americos first came to Liberia, is it true that there were indigenous tribes who were engaging in cannibalism and slavery?
No, I think we've said that before. Cannibalism, I don't know about that. I've never heard about that in Liberia, except during the war. Now, if you said rebels, if you said rebels were probably involved with cannibalism, that would be something to talk about, because rebels and militias who just go about doing things on their own, they could choose to do anything to any dead body that they had. They killed to a dead body and just do anything to them. But when you talk about slavery as well, slavery was not a practice as being slavery, but indigenous Liberians were being adopted. That's how I like to put it. Indigenous Liberians were being adopted by American Liberians for service purposes. They lived with them, perform domestic service, and as well they were given chances to go to school.
No. What I mean, so when when Americos, the first Black Americans came to Liberia in 1847, was it 18 or whatnot?
1822. About
right.
1822.
Did they witness indigenous Liberians practicing cannibalism and or capturing other indigenous Liberians and selling them to, we'll say, Europeans to be traded as slaves?
No, in Liberia and on the West African coast, when the transatlantic slave trade was occurring, there was no place called Liberia at the time. And even when these guys,
you kind of went out. Say that one more time.
When the transatlantic slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, Europe and America, Africa, Europe, Americas, Africa, Europe, Americas. That's how the slave trade went. Are you understanding that? It's like the transatlantic slave trade was a three-way transaction. It was either from Americas to the African, and then they pick up those slaves, take them to Europe. From Europe, they bring them to America. It was either three ways they were doing it. Either from Europe, Africa to America, then Europe, or Europe, Africa, Europe, America. Perhaps that's how they did it. But it was a three ways like this.
Okay, but were indigenous Liberians capturing other Africans and selling them to Europeans?
Not at the time when the Americans got there. When the Americans got there, there was not the practice of that kind. There was not a practice of that kind.
What about before they got there?
Before they got there, the West African coast was being labored under different categories. So whether the soil, Liberian soil, slave trade was being practiced there, it has not been established. But there were different kingdoms from tribal days many years ago that were practicing the slave trade in Africa. Whether people did on the soil of Liberia, where now called Liberia, it's not been established yet. If there's any information about that, I'd like to know about it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So another question we had in the in the chat room. So you're saying you're not aware, and I just one more time so we can clarify. Can you keep going in and out? You're not aware of Liberian. So you're not aware when Americans first showed up in 1847 to Liberia that indigenous tribes were practicing human sacrifice, cannibalism, or trading slaves. So when Americans came to Liberia, they didn't witness or see any of that.
Not to my knowledge. I have not read of that.
Okay.
I have not read of that. I have not heard of that either.
Okay.
But what I do know is that the African continent was divided into several sub-regions as it is now. And those regions were being classified as kingdoms and empires. Those empires had different practices at the time. Now, the empires at the time covered mass land of area. It could include Liberia, it could include Ghana, Ivory Coast, and other places. In fact, history puts it that some of those empires were mostly headquarters in the Malis and the Ghana areas. Mm-hmm. That's where those empires were being headquarters at the time. Major kings and empires were being settled in that area. And all of those areas were all considered to be under one kingdom or one empire at a time. So there were many years ago before you even had the Americo-Liberians.
Okay. Another question. Is it true that Liberia was the most successful successful nation on the African continent in the 1970s? Is there any truth to that?
Oh yeah, it's a fact. It's a fact. Liberia had successfully established itself as one of the world leading economies at the time in the 70s, prior to the 70s, in the 60s, mm-hmm. in the late 60s, coming up to the 70s. Even prior to the 60s, there were a lot of things going on. Liberia had signed a lot of concession agreements. In fact, we had a president called President Totman, William V.S. Totman. Mm-hmm. William V.S. Totman was an Americo-Liberian descendant, but belonging to the Gribble tribe. And he's from the southeastern region as well, from Maryland in Africa, the Maryland County. When he became president in 1964, President Taubert declared something that we call open door policy for investment. And so his proclamation drove a lot of investment to Liberia. It encouraged a lot of investors to come to Liberia. There were investors from all over the world that went to Liberia, exploiting iron ore, gold, and timbers. Mm-hmm. And then remember now, from the onset of Liberia, since 1926, Liberia has signed an agricultural concession agreement, investment agreement with Firestone.
Right.
So Firestone has been in Liberia since 1926. Firestone signed an agreement with the Liberian government since 1926 to cover mass land or farm with a lot of rubber plants. The trees that produce the rubber that we use today with, all of these stuff that are plastic materials, it's a lattice that's produced. And those trees are highly, very expensive crops that are planted in Liberia. It grows in Liberia. Liberia became Liberia, in fact, at some point in time, was the highest producer of that crop as a result of the production of Firestone. And then Liberia was one of the highest producer of iron ore. Liberia was highest producer of timbers, the wood that we use to build our homes around it and our floors. Liberia was producing all of those at a very high rate. When Liberia economy was being measured in the late 60s and the 70s, it was being measured with that of Japan's. It was being measured with that of Japan's. But then there was another criticism. Liberia had all of these growth in the economy, but was not being matched with physical infrastructural development. And so there were publications about growth without development on Liberia. At the time, the president at the time, when I spoke with you earlier, I told you this was a guy who just believed in flamboyancy, who believed in luxury, but did not care about expanding his infrastructural development. And so he enjoyed the nice time and did not expand in infrastructural development at the time. So Liberia did not expand in that. From the time the president of 1964 coming to 1973, Liberia was just struggling in between there with all of the resources that were coming in. They were not doing anything much with it. Monrovia was pretty much laid out though. When you see Monrovia, it's an old city with very few buildings, but it's pretty laid out. That was the low corner that everybody sat at the time. And then when you go in the sub-region, there were pretty much fewer things done there. And like in Maryland, the guys try to do their own stuff there too. So they have pretty much nice setups in very small parts of their downtowns. But when you go to the rest of the country, you don't see a lot of things. There were roads not being built. There were schools not being built. There were limited schools to the population growth. There were a lot of kids traveling from long distances just to go to school. I had my uncles and my parents. My father told me he had to travel about 2-3 hours distance by walking to go to school when he was growing up. That was when the system started to open up to them, but then the schools were still limited. Even up to this time, you still have some areas that do not have a lot of schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you had a question.
Yeah. So we have Firestone. Liberia, the shining when it comes to example of success. Tubman, I guess, passes away in office.
Sorry, say that?
Did Tubman pass away in office?
Oh yeah, Tubman fell sick. He passed away in office. I think he died in the hospital in England.
Okay. Taubert then comes into power. I guess let's speak on Taubert's presidency and what exactly did Taubert do that maybe infuriated or set off indigenous Liberians to, I guess, rebel?
Taubert, in my view, Taubert was one of the best presidents that Liberia has had. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm from the indigenous background, but from all fairness, Taubert put Liberia on the right trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Taubert wanted Liberia, given the status of Liberia economically, politically, and with her level of with the sovereignty she had, that many countries in Africa did not have at the time, the independence that Liberia had, and so many countries in Africa did not have. They were still going through colonialism. Taubert thought that Liberia had a lot of advantages to make moves such as political moves, economic moves, infrastructure development, and expansion in various areas. So what Taubert did was, firstly, on the international scene, Taubert had addressed the United Nations so many times. He had addressed the American Congress, and Taubert, as a president, Liberia was making contribution to decisions. To issues relating to Palestine and Israel. Liberia said a lot of things. There were times that Liberia even said through President Taubert that he spoke against Israel. He talked a lot of things about Israel and Palestine. Taubert domestically also expanded the Liberian educational system. He built a couple of schools. He had plans of expanding on infrastructural development. He had plans on including Liberians from all walks of life that has to do with either the indigenous or whether you are an indigenous or you are an American Liberian. Taubert thought that everybody could have worked together. So he became an inclusive government to some extent. But his fall, I would think that his fall came from the international politics that he was involved with. Taubert spoke more to international issues that could probably lead to his downfall. Of course, the indigenous guys who got educated, they still had the thoughts that they could have, there should be a shared government. There should be a democratic process in the government. There should be elections. There should be political parties. And so these guys were like advocating for these things at a time when Taubert was largely involved with international politics, local politics, regional politics, and continental politics. So when you look at the way that he was going, it appears like some world leaders probably did not like what he was doing. Liberia being a small country, Liberia should be like, yes to America. Liberia should be following what America wants to do, not what Liberia wants to do. In other words, I don't know. I'm not saying that that's what led to his fall, but I think he was largely involved with international politics. He made a lot of statements. He said things about Palestine and Israel. Mm-hmm. That led to some of the fall of Taubert, because there was disagreement with some foreign policies of Liberia and that of the US and foreign interests. So perhaps those things could not work together. You cannot be a partner and at the same time having a different view in one front. I hope you understand me. Are you?
Yeah, I'm right here. Someone in the chat room was asking, do you think the expectations of the indigenous population was too high? I don't know what their expectations were, but do you think they were expecting too much? Is that why they, you had the rights rights? I'm pretty sure even though the West might have been involved in regards to the coup that took place of Tubman, do you think the indigenous population supported that because their expectations were too high? Or what? Let me ask you this: what did the indigenous population want? What were their expectations? Why were they disgruntled? I guess.
Well, the indigenous, I think they felt marginalized. I think they felt lack of inclusiveness. They felt like they're being subordinated, and so they needed to be involved. And the opportunity, what happened was the opportunity the guys had, those who lived with those guys and went to school, the opportunity they had through the scholastic experiences, they managed to have learned that government should not be just by few family members. Government should not be just by a few persons. Government should be inclusive from all walks of life. And so that's where the indigenous guys who got educated at the time, when they got an education, they felt that it was about time that there should be an open government. There should be a democratic process. There should be elections. It should not be decided at the Masonocraft, It should not the Masonocraft temple. It should not be decided at the Providence Baptist Church. It should be decided perhaps, at the National Conventional Hall, So there were a lot of things going on at the time that were just between the Americo-Liberians and the guys who were in power. So when those indigenous guys got educated, they began to learn that, look, we've sat here many years, see these guys, watch these guys give us little or nothing just to eat, but they are doing greater things that is not even trickling, that is not even coming down to the poorest man in the village. And the poorest man in the village deserve a road. There should be a paved road to the village. There should be a pipe-borne water. The man he should also have access to water. He should also have access to electricity. He should also have access to chainsaw instead of using cutlass all the time to make his farm. I hope you understand what I'm saying.
Okay, so they didn't have access to the basics of life, I guess, to have a decent standard of life. That's what you're saying.
Well, to a larger extent, the development was centralized. Was just based in the little area where we call city areas and suburban areas where the Americans lived. That's where major developments were going on.
Yeah, but that's that's the case for Africa still to this day for the most part.
Yes,
across the board.
That's because that's how Africa was being led. That's how Africa started.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. If you went to South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Malawi or Tanzania, where you had the Europeans ruling those guys, they did the same thing there. They're only concerned about themselves and went on the farms, took those lands, made their farms, developed the road that went to their farm, and left out the roads that went to the rest of the villages around the country. So you notice that the guy who had the farm, because he was a minister or he was a secretary of some high-level government official, he was able to influence the development of the road that leads to his farm.
Mm-hmm.
However, the rest of the country did not have a road. There was not an advocacy for that. And those were things that caused chaos in the society all of the time. In all of the societies around Africa, the lack of basic social services, the lack of the failure of government to distribute these basic needs to the rest of the people had led to the fall of most governments and the fight that they have today.
So let me get so I'm not putting you on record. So you
No, that's fine.
So you think that the coup was maybe CIA Mossad backed?
Well, historically in Liberia, we consider that coup that led to the death of President Taubert as the we call that, there was a statue of an unknown armed man. An unknown person killed the president. To this date, it is not clear as to who that person was that killed the president. But there was a publication. I didn't get to read that book yet, but it was published by the late president's wife, Mistress Charlotte Taubert. She said she saw a white hand. Now, in her book, that's what she said. That's what those who have read the book said. That's what other intellectuals have said. But was it a white man or it was somebody wearing a white jumpsuit? It's actually not quite clear as to how it happened and who did it. But the guy who succeeded then was not even a killer. Samuel Doe in real sense did not kill President Taubert.
But Doe killed Taubert's staff.
Doe kills Taubert's cabinet members.
Right.
He killed about 13 men. He put them on gun strike. And Doe did that as a result of what I would describe as a result of fear. A fear for comeback. These guys were educated. They could have come back with a lot of issues, and they could have gotten rid of Doe at the time. So I think he was ill-advised, if you were ever advised that, and as well he was, the insecurity he had just could not lead his conscience very well. So that's when he executed those men. But he didn't stop there. He executed a lot of people. His own colleagues who worked with him, his own colleagues who started up with him, like Thomas was saying, there were other guys, Thomas Kuyongba, there were a lot of guys that Doe assassinated because of insecurity. He was insecure for many years until he died.
Yes. Yeah, somebody in the chat room saying that Miss Taubert said she saw white hands and blue eyes. Okay.
Well, I just told you. I said she saw a white hand, but I can't describe what she. Now, the person probably read that book. I have not read that book, but I've been hearing that.
I need to read that book then. So, why did Doe? In fact, was Doe elected or was he selected? How did Doe get into power?
Doe was a master sergeant in the army, and he was a mansion guard, like working at the White House, one of the guards at the White House. And he was probably one of the most senior officers on duty at the time. And so when the thing happened, now remember, the guards are not in the rooms. They are not in the apartment of the president where the president lives. They are there around the buildings and maybe a portion of the buildings, the entrance and the other areas, but they are not in there where the president is. The president got killed on the 5th floor around his offices and his dwelling, his home where he could sleep. So Samuel Doe then were probably serving God from the outside when this thing happened, but they were alerted. And so they went on the scene and witnessed what happened. he being the highest guy on duty as a staff sergeant or master sergeant, what he did was he took advantage of the opportunity. He said, look, it's like the country is vulnerable now, and I think this is an opportunity that I can take advantage of. And so all of his colleagues who were there with him, those who were there with him, those who knew him, because the military base was not far from the offices of the president. The president residence is not far from the military base. It's just about, it might be like 5 minutes walk and 1 or 2 minutes drive. So the guys there just came over and they supported him. I mean, you were on grounds, and you are the highest person here. This is, in fact, this is your assigned area. You can control this place now. So when that happened, that's what happened. He took control of it. And when the so-called educated guys from the indigenous side, we call them the progressives. When the progressives got involved, they left it with him too. They did not say, oh no, Sam Doe, thank you for what you did, but I think we can better handle this thing for you. Just be on the guide and, let's work together. But instead, they supported him. They said, look, you can do this thing, so go ahead with it. I think that's how it happened. And Doe became the leader at the time. Doe from his own ignorance, he didn't know a lot to do. He didn't know how to manage, how to even govern. He was like, he was not even an elementary school graduate. He just was probably just a first grader at the time. I never know, but he was like in his late 20s. He decided he felt insecure, and he was probably advised that, look, you can keep all of these cabinet members here. They're going to come for you tomorrow. They have the powers, they have the resources, they can get the support from abroad, from the West, and they will come right back for you. So the best thing is get rid of them. And so they have no communication. They do not even have a voice. So I think that's how he started. He got rid of those people. But to talk a little negative of the Taubert government, that was highly nepotistic.
Let me ask you this. When this coup took place, what was the surrounding African nations? Was the Senegal is it Guinea surrounds Liberia as well? Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast is there in that area. What was their reaction to what was going on in Liberia?
Those nations were being led by like-minded individuals like Taubert. They were very, very powerful guys from the Ivory Coast. Boyant. You had Sekou Touré, and you have Shaka Stevens. These three guys from the Ivory Coast, Ofoe Boyant from Ivory Coast, Sekou Touré from the Guinea, and then you had Shaka Stevens from Sierra Leone. All of these guys were very powerful and highly intellect. But what took place in Liberia was a military coup. So when military coups take place, in most cases, it is hard to determine what the military leader going to do. Most of the time, they cause chaos, and that's what happened in the case of Liberia. The military leader was very chaotic. His leadership was very chaotic. He killed a lot of people. He seized a lot of places, and they became witch hunting government officials. So it turned out that the neighboring countries could not have a voice on that. I'm pretty sure they made statements, they made public statements, they asked for calm, they asked for peaceful transfer of activities, but it was not as peaceful as it was. They could not resolve it. They could not put stop to what was going on.
Someone in the chat room is asking, did native soldiers understand taking an oath of duty?
Okay. So what are they trying to infer?
Well, I guess when so obviously when Tubman was in power, the indigenous soldiers were supposed to serve Tubman, but I guess when it was decided that he had to be removed, they didn't honor the oath to serve in the best interest or in the leader at that current time. So did a lot of the indigenous, so basically the indigenous soldiers who were enlisted in the Liberian army at that time, did they rebel and play a role in the assassination of Tubman?
As you are aware already, somebody has suggested that Taubert was assassinated by a white hand.
Right.
Obviously, you would not want to infer that it was the natives who played a role in the assassination of Taubert.
Mm-hmm.
What you can always say, what you can safely say, and what I can safely say as well, is that when Taubert was assassinated, and the indigenous enlisted men had the opportunity to seize power because they were at the executive mansion at the time, like Samuel Doe. So what they did was they grouped themselves and they supported the man. They grouped themselves and supported Doe. So by implication, they were all in support of the death of the president, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
or of the coup.
Okay. Someone else is asking, why didn't the Lebanese who run the diamond industry in Liberia, why didn't they get ran out in the two civil wars?
Well, you should understand the Lebanese business guys, a lot of them ran out of Liberia. A lot of them stood their grounds. They stayed there. And they have for economic reasons, a lot of them were still there.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to have, for those who stayed there, they managed to associate themselves with whoever came in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
If for example you took over the time at the time, and I'm here as a businessman, I want to work out a smooth relationship with you so that my business is protected and that I will stay around to do business with the people of, be the businessman here. And remember.
Okay. So go ahead. Finish your question. I'm gonna finish your answer.
I was about to say to you, in the absence of competition in business, the basic commodity seller or supplier at the time makes a lot of money because he becomes it becomes more like a sole proprietorship. So there will be limited supplies, but only from one person, and that person stands the ground of making money. I think that's where most of the Lebanese guys stood their ground. A lot of them did flee though. They fled to Sierra Leone, they fled to Guinea, they fled back to Lebanon, and they came back after the wars, and some of them stayed there.
So we're African or native, or we'll just say Liberian businessmen who had operations set up in Liberia during the time of the Civil War. Were they protected as well, like the Lebanese?
Liberians did not have a lot of setups. Liberian were not largely involved with business, but the quite few who were involved with business did not have the protection. The Liberian world was actually It was very massive. It was massively destructive. It destroyed everything down to the dam. The electrical powers was being looted. Liberia could not turn on its power supplies after the war because everything was being looted. And all that led to the poor supervision of the rebel leaders. There was not a caution on the rebels as they were fighting to for them to be careful as to how they approach infrastructures, not to destroy them. So a lot of infrastructure were being destroyed to the lowest grade. Liberian businesses were also being destroyed. Those Liberian who had businesses, a lot of them lost. In fact, they got killed. Many of them got killed because either the neighbors or somebody joined the rebel group and they become rebellious on their neighbors as opposed to being on enemies. So it became more community, tribal, factional kind of war that was being fought. So the destruction was very massive, very, very massive. Lebanese who stayed in Liberia, they still lost a lot, but they had the opportunity to rebuild because every time there was a peace window, they were probably involved with some business. They could get some money from banks or something. I mean, they were in business, so they knew how to get a ways out of it. And
Okay.
mind
Because
you,
I just but the Lebanese were pretty much for the most part, Lebanese business people were for the most part unaffected or they weren't as affected by the Civil War as the Africans in Liberia.
uh, well, may not be as compared to the Liberians, the mass Liberian population, but they were affected as well. But I'll also let you know. I just want to inject.
Go ahead.
All right. Liberian government officials as well have always been the investors of the Lebanese guys. I want you to understand that. So you understand that the Lebanese guys' survivability was most of the time dependent on government officials.
Okay, so they
Now,
were corrupt in the paying off.
yeah, when the guys get the corrupt money, they will always come back and give to the Lebanese guys. The Lebanese guy gets back into business to do business. Now, when war comes and everything got lost, new government comes. There was always somebody who would entrust him to do business with him, and that's how most of them really start. They kept going on with that.
All right, so let's see here. So Doe gets into office. Now, before the coup, Liberia was the most successful country in Africa, and one of the most successful countries in the world. Am I correct? Is that fair?
Right. No, you are right. You are right.
Okay.
Well, economic wise, yes.
Okay, economic wise, yes. Liberia was a country that was founded by, we'll say, free slaves or by Black Americans. So they come, they develop Liberia, they turn it into one of the into a great nation that other African countries could follow their example. Am I correct? Right.
Right.
Doe gets into office. What happens? And the reason why I asked that, because it seems as if once Doe got into office, Liberia goes into a civil war. We'll discuss the civil wars a little bit. And Liberia is still struggling to recover. Let's deal with what happened once Doe got into office and why he got assassinated by Prince Johnson, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so like
Now,
go ahead.
yeah, let's talk about the Liberian economy during the era of Dole.
Okay.
When Dole took over Liberia, the economy was good. But when Dole took over, it became a fragile economy in the state of a military leader who does not observe human rights, who does not prosecute people, but rather execute people based on his biased interests. It creates conflict with investment. There is no investment that wants to occur, there's no investment that occurs in a fragile state like Liberia at the time. Liberia was not peaceful with
Mhm.
Samuel Doe in his first few years of office. Investors did not feel secure. Investors want to feel secure in order to go on with investment.
Mhm.
I'll tell you in economics, there are a couple of things that drive investments. A peaceful environment, very good business opportunities, and the market. Now, if you don't have a peaceful environment, investors don't feel secure because they feel that their investments will get lost. And
Right.
that's what happened in Liberia. When Doe took over, he assassinated the 13 men on the polls, 13 government officials. Those 13 government officials, we do not even know what were their stakes in various investment around the country. Secondly, he did not stop there. He started to hunt other government officials who were left behind and his own men who he did not feel secure with.
Mm.
There were a couple of investments there. They were still operational, but they became scaled down as a result of the fragility at the time when he was president in the first few years. So the Liberian economy took a downturn instead. Things started to decline on a gradual basis. Liberia was still operating, but was not as it used to be. It was not, the economy was not on the high trajectory. The economy was losing its grips to a military government. And so things were going on. I mean, people were still going to clubs, hotels were operating, iron ore companies were operating, but they were not up to the scale. They have scaled down massively. In fact, some of those companies have changed names because they got sold out. And things that were going on were not very good economic wise. But what you did not have is you still had the infrastructure. And it was the infrastructure that really kept the institution, that kept those companies and kept the economy going while Samuel Doe was president. Then we had a war to come. When you had Charles Taylor, who launched the war, Charles Taylor launched the war. He had his allies, Prince Johnson. They got
Mhm.
split. They fell out. They fell off in the middle of their struggle. Prince Johnson went his way. Charles Taylor went his way. Prince Johnson Prince Johnson was used to kill Doe at the time, and Charles Taylor from the northern part of the country gradually came in and took over the whole southwestern part of the country, I mean southeastern part of the country. For a couple of years, he held onto those areas. Since 1990 up to 1995, Charles Taylor maintained those areas.
Mhm.
There were different groups here and there that were formed. During those times, there were a lot of infrastructural breakdown. And that's where the economy collapsed completely because all the companies were not functional anymore. Infrastructures started to get depleted. In the mid 90s to the end of the 90s, Infrastructures were getting depleted. They were being looted. They were being scrapped. Buildings were being unroofed because some guys felt that they should just get the zing and go build a house in the village instead of a modern house sitting in a well open area, developed areas. So people's homes were being burned down. People were fleeing their areas. People were being killed based on association. And so things got more deteriorated.
So let me ask you this. So so for the most part, once Doe was in office, what, I guess, influence did the Americos have on, or better yet, what role did they play in the Civil War, if any? Like, who was fighting in the Civil War? Because it seemed like there was a lot going on.
Yeah, it was a lot going on, but it was all mixed up. The Civil War was being the Civil War was being engineered by, first, it was organized by the former president now, Mrs. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you know Sirleaf. She supported the Civil War. She said she gave $10,000 to the embryon in the embryonic stages. Charles Taylor was known to be the front commando at the time. So he did the recruiting, he did the organizing, he did the training, and he did the dirty work by going into the fields to fight the war.
Mm-hmm.
It was being supported by Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who had a mixed background as well, indigenous, a little bit of indigenous, a little bit of Americans, a little bit of German, and so on. But and then there were other people who supported this idea of the Civil War. But on the general stand, the public embraced the war because the public did not know what they were looking up for. It's like yearning for peace. Yearning for a change. The yearning for change could lead to the death of your mom and your dad or yourself. Mm-hmm. But you don't even know what the change going to be. That's what happened. Liberians did not know what war would have been like. They thought it would have been like the coup. So when Samuel Doe was being overthrown by war, Liberians were like, let Charles Taylor come and get this guy out of this place because, things were chaotic. We think it was like we should have another person instead of him. So they embraced the war. The rebel guys came, Charles Taylor recruited a lot of people. He did not have a lot of challenge when it comes to, combat. It was in the mid-90s he started to have challenges when other fronts were being built. But he didn't have a lot of challenges when he first came. He just walked through the counters and captured those places. The National Army was not even, they were not well prepared for wars and other things. They went through it, but they could not survive it. They all got defeated. So the war was staged by Charles Taylor, who is a mixed American and indigenous Liberian, but with his own political mindset. And then he incorporated quite a few American Liberians who also have indigenous background. So it expanded. The war was largely fought by the typical indigenous Liberian kids who were being recruited. So the guys you see fighting on the TV, on the videos, when you watch the videos, all the guys who you see carrying the guns with them, many of them, 99% of them were indigenous kids. They were all born and adapted to be rebel guys. They fought the war. They were all indigenous. They live in communities, and they fought the war. They were not, as I said to you, they did not know what they were getting involved with. they were seeking change that they didn't know what it would have meant to them. And so a lot of people got involved with the war, they got recruited, and they fought the war. Indigenous mostly fought the war, but they did not fight it all by themselves. They were being recruited by Charles Taylor.
Mm-hmm. Now, where was Taylor getting all these weapons and funding from?
That's the major question that we are asked today. Where Taylor got all the funding from? What I can say to you is that, our former president, Madam Sirleaf, she said she contributed $10,000, maybe in the late '80s towards that. Towards that organization.
$10,000. That's pennies when you put up.
Well, I mean, she said that's what she
operation.
She said that's what she did, but we don't know which foreign powers that contributed a lot more to that.
People said Gaddafi contributed a lot to Charles Taylor.
Yes, Gaddafi did a lot. Gaddafi trained Charles Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
He trained Charles Taylor, and I'm pretty sure he armed him. I don't know how much ammunitions Charles Taylor got from Gaddafi, but he did train Charles Taylor. Mm-hmm. Charles Taylor came down to Burkina Faso. There was a French guy called Blaise Compaoré.
He overthrew. He led the coup against Thomas Sankara. Yeah, he's a bitch. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, you got a story. Yeah. So, but Blaise Compaoré was one of the guys who let Charles Taylor in.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Taylor came in. He hosted Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor came in, and Charles Taylor went through the Guinean borders to get into Liberia. How did Charles Taylor pass through Guinea? Today, Liberians have not been able to answer that question. Who in Guinea that let Charles Taylor into Liberia? We have not been able to answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Taylor was trained by the CIA? Because he has an interesting story. So he was in jail, allegedly, in America, allegedly breaks out and becomes a rebel leader and president of Liberia. Like, how does that happen?
Well, it's still a wonderful question to be answered. Mm-hmm. Maybe the American government can give their own takes on that. We hope that there will be some stories that will come out in the future, how Charles Taylor broke jail in America, and how did he land in Libya?
Right.
Because leaving the jails in America, you cannot just fly out of the jails in America. You must have gone through borders. You must have gone through an airport that took you to Libya, or you must have gotten on the boat or a ship. I don't know how he got to Libya. Right. Charles Taylor, in his own testimonies, he did not mention how he left Liberia. How he left jail in America. He had not said it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope he can write a memoir before he dies.
Because he went to in front of the International Criminal ICC.
Yeah, he got convicted.
Yeah, he got convicted, but I'm surprised that no one's really asked him, like, how did you end up from prison to Libya, to the president, to rebel leader to president? Like, no one's asked that.
I don't know. Yeah, I think a direct question of that nature was not asked, because I think I monitored that too. But he did explain how he came to be prominent.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming a rebel leader, because he was being charged for illegally arming guys in Sierra Leone, and as well getting blood diamonds from Sierra Leone. So he was giving the guys arms, and he was getting diamonds in exchange. Remember, in his testimonial, he also said the guy who took war to Libya at the time, Follett Sankara, they both met in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who took war to Sierra Leone at the time, Follett Sankara, Charles Taylor met Follett Sankara in Libya. They met at the training base. So the efforts to destabilize the region was kind of was more done at the same time. The preparations for Sierra Leone and the preparations against Liberia were all done at the same time. The guys were being trained at the same place to bring war to Liberia. That's how it happened.
All right, let's get into this. When did you, one more time, when did you or when did your family immigrate from Liberia to America?
Well, I did not come to America. I came to America quite a few weeks ago. I mean, few years ago, not very long. I did not grow up in America at all.
Okay. Well, okay. Let me ask you. When did Liberians in mass start leaving Liberia to come to America?
Liberians were being taken to America, were being migrated to America when the Civil War was on the rise. When Charles Taylor has taken most part of the I'll say this: when Charles Taylor has taken most part of the country, a lot of Liberians fled into exile and they went to Guinea, they went to Ivory Coast.
Mm-hmm.
There were established camps, refugees camps that hosted Liberians, and with these refugees camps, you had international humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross. You had the United States Aid, the USAID. You know, I don't know if you're aware of the United States Aid, the US Aid.
Yeah.
And then AID, and you had a lot of other organizations. But there became the question of resettlement. Mm-hmm. These people were once living a normal life. Now they're living in a household condition where they do not even have, a lot of things to themselves. And so they needed to be resettled. So the United States decided that they're going to have Liberians immigrate to the United States for resettlement purposes, so that these people can have their life can get their lives back and start to make lives again. They can begin to go back to school and do things for themselves, and that's how the American government got in and started to migrate Liberians from the Ivory Coast and then extended to Ghana, because most Liberian by the mid 90s, the last years in the 90s, like 2000, 1998, 97, 98, 99, mm-hmm. most Liberians had left the Ivory Coast for Ghana. So those who were in Ivory Coast, some of them were fortunate. They got on the refugee program and came to the States. Those who were not fortunate, they moved to Ghana because they thought Ghana was an easy area to live, given the language flexibility. Ghanaians speak English. Mm-hmm. And so they moved to Ghana. And the Ghanaian government provided a land to the United Nations to establish a refugee camp for Liberians as well. So there was a big community of Liberians in Ghana. Mm. There again, the repatriation, the immigration program continued for them. And there were Liberians also in Guinea. Most Liberians in Guinea had the opportunity to go to Australia. And some of them went to the UK and other places. So all these programs were being set up by the international community to help to help resettle war-affected people like Liberians. That's how Liberians came to the US. They went to Australia, they went to Canada, and they went to the UK and other parts of the world.
Mm. So, and it was because of the Civil War, correct?
Because of the Civil War.
Okay. So then my next question is, again, we're taught that the Americos were ruthless when they were in power. Why didn't indigenous Liberians, why did they not immigrate in mass under American rule, but immigrated once Doe or the Civil War took place?
Well, you got to understand, in the mix of hardship, despite hardship, once there is peace, there's hope. And so that was something that was happening. Economic downturns occurred in every economy, but it does not collapse the state. So the ups and downs were there during the peaceful time of Liberia. We call those times normal days in Liberia. When you hear about normal days, people will be telling you about the 70s, the 80s, and the 60s and 50s. So Liberians were not exposed to traveling around the world, only for those who had the opportunity to do so. Everything was being done there. Liberia had the infrastructure, Liberia had the facilities that it needed to live their lives. So everything they wanted to do, they could have done it there. Some of them went to school abroad, but it was not a big deal because the facilities were there and they were being improved. Gradually, they were being improved. So had we not had the war, you would have counted Liberians in the United States. There were Liberians here, though, but you would have counted them because there wouldn't be a lot of them here because the infrastructure there, the educational facilities there would have developed. Jobs opportunities would have expanded. That's one major reasons why people migrate a lot. Jobs employment opportunities, and infrastructure and education. If the infrastructure is not available, the basic social services are not available, education is not available, then jobs are not available. Nobody wants to live in a community, in a society like that. Liberia had all of those things prior to the war. When the war came, people were forced to move out of their homes. They were forced to flee to different countries. They were forced to live in different communities. They were forced to learn different languages. And so those things that were happening was just something that unbearable. And so Liberians were like, you know what? We have to adapt to the new style of life. From the outset, we were pretty much comfortable in Liberia.
Okay, so life was good in Liberia before
life was very good. Now, remember, in the sub-region, there were Ghanaians, there were Sierra Leoneans, there were Ivorians, there were Guineans flooding into Liberia for granaries pasture. Liberia had the best economy. Liberia had good schools. There were times that all these people were coming to Liberia for granaries pasture. So Liberians really were not thinking about leaving Liberia because everything they had, everything they wanted was there, and there were progress of more development.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Somebody asked in the chat room, what role did Charles Taylor play in George Weah being elected? Do you know the answer to that by chance?
I don't know what role Charles Taylor had played in George Weah's election, but I do know George Weah said he spoke to Charles Taylor once on the phone. And Charles Taylor's ex-wife, his political party merged with merged with the George Weah's political party, and they both formed an alliance into these elections that George Weah just won. Charles Taylor's ex-wife is George Weah's vice president. So, by extension, you may say, the government of George Weah is being supported by, maybe pro-Taylor people. You can say that, but I'm not sure if you said Charles Taylor had a direct influence. That I don't know, because Charles Taylor is in jail. He's not allowed to interfere into politics in the world, at least to say Liberia. And he may only want any government to advocate for himself, and instead of influencing that government to come to power, because I don't think he has that influence anymore in jail.
All right, 1 second. I'm having issues on the Facebook side. Facebook stop. Yeah, Facebook just stopped the stream on I don't know. Facebook just stopped the stream, but we're still good on YouTube. We're still going to continue. But there was one more question I wanted to ask that somebody asked on Facebook. Let me just pull it up real quick. Give me 1 second. It should be in the chat portion. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. I just want to ask you one last question. Then we'll go ahead and close out. Yeah, just Facebook just abruptly just stopped the stream. Let's see here.
That happens in time, maybe.
Yeah. It's crazy. It just they stopped it. Let's see here. Let's see your business turn. Let's see here. Where's this? Hold on 1 second. Let's see here. Okay, during the war, where were the Americo-Liberians?
The Americo-Liberians, a lot of them have fled.
Okay.
A lot of them had fled. A lot of them were still around. Quite a few of them left there. And a lot of them got killed too, because they were still in high places in government. A lot of them were just there. The younger ones and guys who probably lived with them were there. They took care of their properties. Adopted brothers and children, and a lot of guys were there taking care of their properties. They lived there on their properties up to this time. And so to this point, if you went to Liberia, and you went into those settlements of the Americo-Liberians, you will mostly see people who lived with that family, who were adopted into that family, who became managers of the properties. But the actual family members of that properties, out of the parents have died, and the kids are here in the States. So you probably just going to see a property with caretakers, but the actual owners are probably in the States. That's what it's like. And most of these guys that do have those properties there, it's like, living downtown Atlanta, Georgia, and those properties are there. Your family probably got some properties there, or the guys who got properties there, they just go and collect the lease. That's what most of them do these days. Most government offices were being leased from elites of government, people who have properties downtown. Those things still happen. I don't know here in the States. I'm pretty sure some of that still happen, but to a larger extent, it happened in Liberia for a longer time.
And so I'm going to ask two questions, and you can ask them quickly. You don't have to give us long answers. Question number one: are you familiar with Bob Johnson's, who was the founder of BET, his investments in Liberia?
Yes.
Okay. How are they working? How is it? I know he has a resort there. How's that working out? If you've got any word on that.
Bob Johnson's investment is the they call that the RLJ, because his full name is Robert Johnson.
Yep. Robert Bob Johnson.
Johnson. So RLJ Hotels is a hotel facility,
Right.
that is being built. It's not it's a very nice one. It's somewhere where a lot of people would like to stop. It's an expensive place. It's a classic hotel. It's a class hotel going to Liberia. It's right in Painesville along the beaches.
Yeah, I heard. And then last question, and actually we're going to speak on this in another video, but people are saying, how do you feel as a Liberian, George Weah's son, representing the U.S. in soccer and not Liberia?
Well, as a Liberian, I would have loved George Weah's son to play for Liberia, but there is one thing that you got to understand in the laws, the international soccer, the football federation, the World Football Federation called FIFA,
Right.
Football International Federation Association. They allow kids to play for any country of their choice until they are 21, at which time they will be able to make a decision. I think either 18 or 20 or 21. It's between the ages of 18. So the kid is pretty much underage to decide where to be as a player and as a citizen yet. He can choose at age 18. He still have the opportunity to choose at age 18 to play for the United States or to play for Jamaica, where his mom came from, or to play for Liberia. I would really love to see him play for Liberia. But if the sporting department in Liberia is not quite developed, then it discourages a lot of kids because they feel that they would not always be seen on an international scene if the country was not successful to go for international games. That's what discourages a lot of players around the world sometimes. But now that his father is the president, I hope that he will develop that. He will put a lot more resources into that, so his own son can be able to play for Liberia.
Wow. Well, brother, what would everybody who joined us tonight? Thank you for joining us. We're going to continue the conversation when it comes to Liberia. I know a lot of you guys are like, Dynast, man, change the subject, but I'm going to make sure we continue this, the conversation on Liberia. Brother, we're going to go ahead and close out. You have the final word. And also, if you want to give people your contact information as well.
Well, my name is sonponfreeman, and you can always get me on Facebook. I'm sorry, I don't do Facebook a lot, but you will find me on Facebook, sonponfreeman. You will find me on I have a YouTube. I'm not always on YouTube as well, but all of these communications, I do receive comments. You want to call me, my number is 267-469-5615. We can personally discuss issues about Liberia, West Africa, and the rest of Africa, including other developmental issues. If you have interest in Liberia, Liberia is pretty much a place of home to every Black man on the face of this earth. Liberian Constitution provides only Negro descents are allowed to become citizens in Liberia. Now that George Weah is trying to change the Constitution to incorporate colorful people, including white men, to become citizens and as well, obtain properties in Liberia, that would be a welcoming thing so that we have an inclusive citizenship, race of citizenship, but every Black man is welcome to become citizen of Liberia. The fact that you're a Black man, you have a Negro descent, you're a Negro descendant, you do have the right to become citizen of Liberia. Liberia is a great place. It is the place of all African Americans as well. As you know the history already, so those are open to you. Give me a call anytime if you wish to. My name is sonponfreeman, and my email is sonponfreeman@gmail.com. Give it to them, Dennis.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in. Let me put it in the chat room. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I'm put it in the chat room right now. Where's my Gmail at? Hold on 1 second. Let me go and put it in the chat room.
And I hope we can have more. And I hope we can have more discussions on other issues.
Oh yeah, we gotta get you back on this week.
Okay, that's great.
What we're gonna discuss before. Hold on 1 second.
I hope we can do that by Thursday night.
What'd you say?
I said I hope we can do that by Thursday or Friday night. That'd be fine.
Okay.
Saturday night.
Maybe Thursday, because I'm supposed to go to DC Friday afternoon. So but we'll see. I'm supposed to go Friday afternoon. So all right, I'll put
You gotta tell me a little more. You gotta tell me a little more about yourself. Maybe we'll talk that on the phone.
Yeah, I'll give you a call, man. We'll wrap. But it's late out here. I'm about to go to bed. But brother, again, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, please make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you have not, also go to Search for Uhuru on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. Also go to dynastymirror.com. Go to searchforuhuru.com. Also go to Amazon.com, search your name, Dynasty Mirror, please buy a book. Everybody, thank you so much for coming on. Till next time, peace. All right, brother.
Peace, bro.